Welcome to the Geek Podcast, where I don't have my intro notes up. I'm Void, and I'm here with my co-host Beej.
I don't have them up because I don't look at them. So, hey!
Today we are talking about LitRPGs, which I'm sure I wrote something that was related to that in the intro, but we're going to roll with it because that's kind of funny to me. So what is LitRPG? If you guys haven't heard us talk about this a little bit in the past, it's basically this like genre of novels where games or like game-like challenges are an essential part of the story, and it's where like visible RPG mechanics are a significant part of the world. And BJ mentioned to me earlier that like GameLit is a major genre and that this is like a subgenre of that, right?
Yeah, I think where they'll have some like Soda Pop Soldier is one where it's within just like gaming but not so much RPG, and then you have these where people are going into role-playing games specifically where it's more of a subgenre from what I can tell.
Yeah, and I was trying to look up like examples to try to figure it out in my mind, like what is this and what's a good, just like as a reference point, something that you can go to right away. And the one that I came back to a few times was Sword Art Online. It just feels like a perfect encapsulation of what LitRPG is as a genre to me. Did you have any other examples?
Sword Art Online, I saw that a bunch. Dot Hack, things like that. Animes where they're dealing with the virtual world. I've seen people debate back and forth on Ready Player One, whether it is within that particular genre or not. To me, it feels like it because it's going in and playing these games from inside the world itself. So at least it feels like it to me. I don't know if it's one of those where the hardcore readers consider that one of them, but those are the ones that really stand out in my mind, just automatically think of whenever I hear the term.
Yeah, that's awesome. So before we like dive into it, I wanted to mention like, why are we doing this topic? Because it's not quite a normal topic. It's something that we might have gotten around to covering eventually, but well, you should probably explain this because you usually do it better.
But on our Patreon, one of our tiers of rewards is that you're our boss. So you tell us what you want us to talk about, and then we talk about it. So Ken Murray, who is an awesome member of the community, was really stoked about LitRPG books. He reads a ton of them and really wanted us to dig in. So he sent us a couple of books, pledged and supported us on Patreon, and so we're going to do this episode, I want to say dedicated to Ken, but really, I don't know how else to put it, but because of Ken being so awesome and so passionate about this, he has made us the same way.
Yeah, it's awesome. And he bought both of us a book to go along with it. And like, it was kind of like homework, but in a way it was fun because like I haven't had an assigned reading and I don't even know how long. So
it was weird. That was the weird part where it was like going back to school. I was like, I have to read this and then I have to do my book report on it. And it was fun though. I'm like, it was cool. I like doing that. The English major in me is like, oh, good.
Yeah, so the book I got was Divine Dungeon, Dungeonborn by Dakota Krout, and you got Ascend Online, right?
By Luke Chmilenko.
Ooh, I don't know how to say that name.
I don't know how to say his name at all. It's just look for Ascend Online. It comes up for that one. And there will be links in the show notes to these as well.
Yeah, so I think maybe we should dive into each of the books and kind of talk about our experiences with it, and then we can come back around to like the genre as a whole.
Yeah, so I'm really curious about yours. Like when Ken sent me a message, I think it was on Discord through all of this, he told me which book he had sent me and everything, and then he told me about yours, just the high level like one sentence synopsis, and it sounded so cool, but I didn't know if it would be something that you would be able to stick with, and so I'm really curious on how you felt about getting into it.
Getting into it took a little while, but once I was into it, I was like, okay, I like this. It's good. Because it gets a little in the weeds. I mean, I should probably say what it's about. So it's a book about a dungeon it's like a brand new dungeon when the book starts. I mean, it's called like Dungeonborn. And it's all about how a dungeon like ascends in power and like gains power over time as it exerts its influence around it. And at the same time, there are other characters that are actually like people and beings and stuff that they also have power that grows over time. So they're very much like video game type conventions in here, or tabletop game, whatever, where, you know, people have different power levels and you can go from like a rank B to a rank A to, you know, whatever. And you start at like rank, I think it's F or E, and then you slowly work your way up. And, you know, there's tons of people that never become an adventurer ever, and they're like rank like whatever, like really high letter number. And it's interesting because the book got really into the weeds on the level of detail for like what it takes to like go up in power and like how experience works. They don't call it experience, but it's, you know, something like that. It's called essence, and then it's mana and it's other stuff like that. And it's kind of similar for dungeons and for people, but they're also two distinct paths that are different, and you get both points of view. And it was one of those things.
That's what I was about to ask.
Yeah.
Where when you say there are both points of view, I was curious. Like, I was under the impression that it was told from the dungeon's perspective, like as though it is an entity who is taking on these adventurers coming in. Am I wrong in understanding it that way?
No, for the most part, that's the main character, I guess, would be the dungeon. But there's like a secondary character that's almost like a main character that's a person, that's an adventurer that's ranking up at the same time. So it's kind of like having two characters that like intersect with each other, because the one guy owns the land that the dungeon is on, which is why he becomes an adventurer, and they both kind of grow in power alongside each other, which is really interesting to see. And
I love that idea, just like having a dungeon on this property.
Yeah,
it's like
basically.
I know Austin's grandma has like a cave up the hill and from her backyard where he's told me about like diving into it and having to get his family to pull him out by his feet because he couldn't back up anymore because of going into this cave. And that's all that is immediately the first thing that popped into my head whenever you said this was he owned this property. It's like, oh man, there's just a dungeon and they're growing somewhere.
Yeah, and I mean, so those are the two main characters, and it's kind of like the dungeon and the adventurer start right around the same time. They both gain power and levels and abilities at like a similar rate, not exactly the same, but they kind of grow together as the story goes on, and they become linked in a bunch of interesting ways because one owns the property that the other one is on, or is, I guess, not really on. It's a part of the property because it's a dungeon. And then like a boomtown grows up around the dungeon because the dungeon has this like pure essence that's super rare to find in any dungeon. So it gets down to like the type of dungeon and like what's going on with that, which is a whole piece of the book, or series, I should say. I actually read 2.5 of these, and I'm in the middle of the third. I haven't finished it yet, but I'm going to. So a lot of the mechanics are super nitty gritty, like I said, about power levels and moving from like a class C adventurer or a dungeon to a class B, and what that means for characters and essences and abilities and mana. But somehow, like, it all works. Like, the author usually manages to keep it interesting while explaining the power levels and leveling up. And I really like the parts from like the dungeon's perspective, because it has to add new floors as it levels up, and it has to add new like mobs and new abilities, and it only knows the things that it's come in contact with. So it starts recruiting people and entities and stuff to bring it new things so that it could make new items and new people and new mobs and new everything, right? And like new bosses in dungeons. Like, it's really interesting. It's just that every once in a while it feels like the author gets a little bit too lost in their own like world building that they've created, and it's like, okay, you gotta step back a little bit and move the story forward a little bit before you go back into this. So I think overall it does a pretty good job balancing it, but there were parts near the beginning where I was like, oh, I hope this picks up. And it did, which is probably the best thing I can say about it.
Well, I'm really curious about this because generally what we've talked about, what you've said, is kind of a concept, kind of a premise of the novel. What is the actual story that's being told? What is the inciting incident other than this is a dungeon with a high level? Is there a problem that needs to be solved? Is there a narrative arc that is taking place other than the growth of the adventurer and the dungeon that kept everything moving at a decent pace?
Kind of. So that was one of the things about the series that like I wasn't sure for a really long time. Now that I'm into book 3, I see more like the arc of it. It kind of starts out as mostly a premise, honestly, and it doesn't have a ton of like driving force behind it right away, which is maybe why I felt like I did at the beginning. But now I see that it's really about like the dungeon and the character becoming linked, but then also the land that it's on is between different kingdoms that are like having conflicts. So it's this really good neutral ground that a bunch of different like races and kingdoms and stuff can come to. And it's also a super rare type of dungeon. So everybody wants to come there to get like power and loot and the essence that's in it and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's, you know, from the dungeon's perspective, it's about just like gaining more power. And then from the guy's perspective, it's kind of the same. It's about like ranking up and getting more power. And that, if for a long time, it feels like that's the driving force of the book. But there's also something else going on with like necromancers and power and different kingdoms and the wider world. And I feel like if I had finished book 3, I would have a lot better answer for you. But I mean, even having finished the first 2, I still feel like that's the main thrust of the story.
And I love that idea within that, like having the politics going around it. Like I was whenever he said that about the dungeon, like having to deal with the adventurers, that's what really I was like, oh man, this is going to be great if it's done right. And so I was really curious on what kind of story was being told about it. And I know you listened to it
from the dungeon's perspective, because it's kind of like it wants to advance in power, but it keeps giving. It has to like balance itself, basically, like a dungeon master would do, right? Like it wants to do things that will encourage people to go to the next level and fight harder monsters, and it's trying to like kill people, because if it kills people, it gets all the experience from them, the essence from them.
Oh.
But at the same time, it has to make the rewards enough that it lures people in and people will keep coming back for it. So it's trying to be a really lucrative dungeon while also still being like cruel and deadly at points. So like that's its motivation. And that's honestly, like from the dungeon side, that's kind of the whole story, is like just that. But it's enough. There's something there about like being in that mental mode of like, you know, basically like DMing. But from the dungeon's perspective, that's enough to like kind of pull me through the book. And I was surprised how well that worked without having a whole lot else going on, even though there's this whole other thing with the character and the land and politics and stuff.
Well, I mean, do you remember the video game Dungeon Keeper, where you were the bad guy? Basically, you basically were the dungeon, then setting up traps for the adventurers to come in. It was a PC game back in the 90s, I think, was when it was. But it was a strategy game where there were adventurers coming. Man, there were adventurers coming into your dungeon, and you had to figure out what the best traps were to make sure that they didn't make it through.
Yeah, no, I remember that. This kind of reminds me of that, but it also, it reminds me of being a DM too, in a way, which is super interesting. So I like the books. I mean, I listened to all of them as audiobooks since I had no time for reading while I was in the middle of moving, but they're good audiobooks too. So I'm going to finish listening to the last half of that third book, and I'll report back. But I like it. Like, I can recommend it as a series. If anything that I just said was interesting to you, there's probably enough there for you to get through a book or two.
Now, I have one more question about it. I'm really curious because of the nature of the genre itself. Is this based on, like, are they video game characters, or is this all within one world? Like, or is the world itself just the world of the books? Is the universe just there? Or is it someone from the real world who happens to be playing a game where all of this is going on?
No, it's just the real world. It's basically just a fantasy setting.
Okay, because that's the opposite of mine, which is someone going into a video game.
Like nothing about it.
Okay, so mine's called Ascend Online, ASCEND. I know that my accent on that one's actually brutalizing it. So Ascend Online by Luke Chmilenko, I guess. I don't know. Okay, so to start off with, this book is far better than I thought it was going to be, because it is the kind of almost generic archetype of what I understood LitRPG to be, of someone in the real world going into a video game or playing a video game and making them like living that life, doing the quest, and basically just being engrossed by that world. And so to me, it reminded me of Ready Player One to begin with. I mean, the players get put in there's this new game. Like, you start from the very launch of this game in here. The characters are playing a brand new game that everyone's losing their minds over, and it is all new virtual reality. where they get put into a sensory deprivation unit. Basically, they pay to be housed in these like company run dormitories that have the hardware to play this game, because you have it hooked in and you're lying there, but it's basically being piped into your brain. So you're fully immersed in this VR world. I mean, even down to the pain receptors. When you get punched by a skeleton, you feel it. And so it was really interesting that way, because it took like what I was used to with VR stuff from Ready Player One, where they would have to wear a haptic suit or have different levels of technology to be different, have different levels of immersion. They took that, the writer took that completely out and made it so that here's how you play it, here's how I can set up these mechanics, and this is how it's all going to work. Like, you don't have to deal with any of that other extraneous stuff. And it took me maybe 20 or 30 pages to really get into it, and then I was like, okay, I really like this. And going in, I gotta say, I was biased, I guess is the better way to put it, is that even though I'm a self-published author, I don't read a lot of self-published authors, because generally they're not terribly high quality, but I don't read a lot of self-published authors. So because of that, I was expecting this to be kind of a hack job, and it really surprised me by how professionally edited and put together this was. That there are moments where the English teacher in me is like, oh yeah, you needed to edit right here or something like that, but you can do that with every book, and this one was obviously professionally edited, obviously well done, and so a lot of the mechanics and everything were really smoothed out. It was a very professional book, and so like as I got into it, it's like there's this VR world, like I said, and these players go into it, and the NPCs they act like real people. Like, the dude gets into this town and he's part of a goblin. Immediately, the main character gets in part of a goblin raid when he logs in. And so he's having to save people from goblins and watching people die. And it looks like people are dying to him. Like, when he gets shot by an arrow, it hurts. And so this is like the perfect sandbox world that you could think of. Like, if you were to just jump into a video game and you think about what it would be like to be in the perfect VR MMO, that's what this is. And like, down from the way that the characters, the NPCs interact with the adventurers, that's what they call players. There are very few differences. Like, they talk to them like people. Like, they have conversations, they interact and react with pretty much normal AI, except that it pulls in game mechanics into it, things like that, where they can only teach you so many things, or where it's like, if this is a journeyman trainer something, they can only teach you up to a certain level. It's like, oh, well, you got to go to this city to go learn something like that, or so nobody's traded a scroll for that one, sorry. And like, I really liked what it was, how they did it, like, because they were on launch day, like, and nobody knew anything about this world or this game. Like, as they went out from this town or out into the world, the players got to name and discover areas. So when they found a forest covered in spider webs, and the guy thought that it was thought about it and called it the webwood, that became the official name because he was the first person to discover that, and that's what he referred to it as and marked it as. Like, there were unique quests and events and abilities and things like that they were able to find, and you could alter the course of the ongoing storylines by interacting with it a different way. Like, because he fought off the goblins, that meant that they went back and regrouped instead of just moving on and going into a different area, something like that.
That's super interesting. It seems like your book was like very much in the video game vein, and mine, I got like a D&D type of feels from it, like tabletop.
Yeah, this one was hardcore video game stuff, like down to and it worked a lot. Like, if you could honestly, outside of it being a video game in there, I mean, they're in this deprivation unit where they have to log out every little bit to make sure that, they're not becoming vegetables and dying. but they the way that they gain skill and stuff like that was also could translate into tabletop as well. It's like the more they use swords, the better they got at it. When they took hits, they would gain experience and learn how to get out of the way better. And it was interesting because it's told first person from the character in the game, that it made sense on how when he leveled up, he knew how to do it better. He was like, I feel like I know how to get out of the way more, like more so than just like being hit and be like, oh, I got to get out of the way. It's like, no, I know a technique on how to do that, and then was able to do it. It was really, really interesting to read about, because the author really did cool things, like having the HUD that they could look up and see for how much experience they needed. There were subclasses that they talked about, stuff like that, and it never got too mechanic-y. Like you said, yours kind of got too into the weeds occasionally.
Yeah, sometimes.
This one talked about it, and it would talk about needing to be level 7 to go out and kill these animals or whatever, or get this, but it was always just kind of how you and I would talk about it if we were leveling up in the next Final Fantasy XIV expansion. It was never a doing the math kind of thing. It was always, well, I need to kill 125 of these spiders to do it, and then they go and it tells a story about them going out to kill those 125 spiders, let's say. One of the coolest things about this one that I love the most is and this is, I'm going to do my best. This next part is a little bit of a spoiler, but it's so cool that I want it to be implemented into a real video game so much that I'm just going to talk about it. And it's not a major spoiler or anything, but it's a spoiler. So if you care, forward along a little bit. At one point early on in the game, he attacks a cougar, a jaguar, a giant cat. I can't remember exactly what kind of giant cat it is. And he tries to kill it, and he fails. And so because he fails and he dies, that cat became his nemesis. That there is a nemesis system in this game that I want in other games, that the first time something like that kills you, that enemy will now start hunting you down as you grow in power, and it will start growing in power. So until you can defeat it, it's going to continually hunt you down in the game world.
That's pretty cool. Little Shadow of Mordor-y.
Yeah, really, it's really cool. And then at some point later on in the I won't say later on in the game, because that's how I think about this one. Later on, they're in this really cool like ruin and figuring out all the story as they get further into the climax of the book, and they basically get warped together, and they get hit by magical energy and everything, and his nemesis all of a sudden becomes like ethereally bonded to him and becomes his familiar, and he's a jerk. It's like this cat is just like a sarcastic, he's exactly what you think a giant magic panther would be like if he were your familiar. And I love him. His name is Amaranth, and I love him so much. He may be my favorite part of the book because of the way that it is. And I want this to be in a video game. I want this to be like where you have a nemesis in an MMO kind of game like this, where you have a nemesis. They keep trying to kill you over and over again. They're super powerful and attacking you in the middle of nowhere, kind of like a Dark Souls person coming in, just destroying you at the wrong moment, and then eventually becoming your familiar when you're finally able to beat them. Like, I loved this.
That
was my favorite thing. Like, and it was throughout the entire book. Like, that was the thing. It led up to this. It was a very natural progression of this happening, where there was a relationship being built on that kind of nemesis back and forth, where that Moriarty and Sherlock Holmes and Professor Xavier and Magneto kind of thing, where there's a relationship more than just, oh, this thing keeps trying to kill me over and over again. And I'm pretty sure that everybody out there who's played an MMO has one particular mob that has done that to you. and that you hate more than anything else. Like when WoW first came out, everybody hated a very particular Murloc, maybe. And you just went out when you got more powerful and just slaughtered it in its village. It's kind of how this felt. It was like this is what people need in games. Like, I would love this to be real.
Cool. So it sounds like you mostly liked the book.
Yeah, mostly did. There were a couple of things I didn't care for. The NPCs use foul language. I did not like this. I'm not a prude. I have a potty mouth. It's one of those things where if I read something, it does not bother me when it's within the confines of that universe, especially it's whatever. But for some reason, just having an NPC in a brand new game drop the F-bomb without hearing it from a person or anything, just that is their natural cadence of being freaked out, is to swear with modern swear words. It really pulled me out of it. Like that one, it's not even that they were doing it, like it fit the tone of the scenes where it happened, but it felt out of place in the game as being NPCs, you know? The writing, like, it didn't make sense why the writers of that game would opt for these characters to be profane. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get it.
And I mean, that's just a personal thing where it's like, I know I actually tweeted about this with the Devil May Cry stuff that had gone on this week, where I'm fine with anything as long as it's a conscious choice to put it in there for a reason. But it seems like there are choices made in this one. And this is one of those kind of things where I feel like this is it being a self-published book, where like somebody at Penguin would have talked him out of this part of it. It's like, this doesn't fit. But so maybe we need to rework this part.
Oh,
but
yeah,
like I said,
see.
that was me. The other part is that Lyrian, the main character, really feels too perfect through most of the book. Like, this is kind of that, I don't even want to say a Mary Sue or a Marty Stew thing. It's just that I know the NPCs are reacting to him because they're NPCs. I mean, that's the way NPCs do everywhere. It's like, hail and well met, adventurer. And just like, you're the best thing that's ever happened to them. And like his friends and everything do too. Like, he's a higher level and he learned some things that they didn't. And so his friends are looking up to him and seeking advice. But he's basically like this preternaturally good player at this game. Like, it was like he was born to play this game. And he doesn't struggle nearly as much as other players do with it. Like, he just kind of gets it. He intuits how to play. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing, it just seems like it's so convenient for him to be this way, for him to be the main character and feel this way and do this. If it were a side character, I don't think it would bother me, because it's just like the competition over there, someone that you are motivated to be better than or try to live up to. But as a main character, as a main POV character, things honestly felt a little too easy at times. And like, he logged into the game, like first time logging in, he all of a sudden gets like logs into a goblin raid in this small town with everything on fire, people dying left and right. It's like being thrown in kind of at the beginning of Lord of the Rings Online, when everything is on fire and you're having to escape the Nazgul. I don't even know if that's the way they start the game anymore, but that's how it was when I played Lord of the Rings Online. And like, you're starting in media res right there. But it turns out that the reason he's there is because he tried to log into the main area, which is they were all taking them to one area, but the server was too crowded. And so when he logged in, he got booted off into another less crowded zone. And that's where it came up. And so now he's basically this kind of township savior where all the NPCs are looking to him, and he's leveling up without any kind of like player killing or anything, because he's so far away from the main area where thousands and thousands of people are basically being thousands and thousands of people in a video game. And so it just feels like that's almost too convenient. Like, it's a very good story. I love the way that it's told, that the story is interesting, that the way that the town grows is super interesting. Like, I've been part of MMO towns that have grown like this one has, with player towns, like in Star Wars Galaxies and Ultima Online. I have done this kind of stuff for towns. Like, it is very interesting. But it was how he got there immediately, and everything just kind of worked out for him in that, where I'm just like, there were things that could have been done narratively just a little bit differently, like a little more hardship.
Some of those like self-published pitfalls that people can fall into.
Yeah, and I mean, I fell into them. I mean, you go read Birthright, and everybody will be like, yeah, but you did this, BJ. And it's like, I sure did. It's like, I absolutely did. And it's like you said, it's a self-publishing pitfall. And but I haven't read the other books in the series, so I don't know how they go from that. I'm actually probably going to grab the audiobooks and listen to them as I'm starting to run again. This one was good enough that it made me want to read the other two, kind of like yours did. So Ken has good taste. I got to say, he sent us good books, and he did it specifically, he said, based on our personalities and what he thought we would like, instead of giving us the same book.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. It says we both got different experiences. So before we wrap up, thoughts on like the genre as a whole. I think that there's something inherent about these books that they're a little bit cheesy, and you have to get over that fact. Like there's this hurdle up front, and I feel like you said it and I said it, but there's something about the first part of the book that's harder to get into, and I feel like there's a little bit of resistance there on my part, because it's like, okay, we're in like a fantasy world, but it's RPG. There's just something, and I can't think of a word better than like cheesy about just like being in a game. You know, it's one of those things that like the first time you create a fantasy world when you're like 6, you're like, oh, I'm going to go in my favorite video game, or I'm going to go in my favorite like fantasy world. You know, it just feels like such low hanging fruit that it almost like pushes you away right at the beginning. But I think you said it took you like 30 pages to get into it. Probably took me like a few chapters to get into mine. And you know, some of that was just resistance to like the cheesiness of the premise.
And part of it, I think, on that one is it's almost like a literary uncanny valley for me, where this isn't how video games work. It's like, this is not what I can play. It was like, this is made up. This is not how the technology would be able to do this. And it's that suspension of disbelief in, okay, that's how it works in this world. That's how this technology is set up. I've had that problem in other fantasy worlds or anything online where it's like the stuff with Sword Art Online. I don't even remember what my particular beef with it was, but I'm like, that's not how it would work. where that's my cheesiness, where it is cheesy, don't get me wrong, and it depends on the writer, I guess, on how they handle that cheesiness. Where it's like yours, it feels like leaned into it with the dungeon being the character and having its own personality. And for me, they talk about it a lot, being a video game, and how, you know, how they deal with these with levels, and how they're glad that this isn't real life, or, you know, that these giant spiders or whatever, like how terrifying they are, but they're always calling it out that it's a video game. So that helps a lot for me.
Yeah, I could see that. It's kind of like if you hang a lantern on it and you embrace it, it gets better. You know?
Yeah, as long as I'm aware that you're aware of it. Like the Writing Excuses podcast taught me that. It's like you can do almost anything in literature as long as you call it out and let the reader know that you're doing this on purpose, so that they don't think that you're an idiot, or that they think you're not aware of it, or whatever it is. It's like you said, hang a lantern on it. It's like, yep, look, I'm doing this, guys. Just deal with it. This is where we're going from here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the other thing that, as I was thinking about the genre as a whole, like I really want to know what else is out there and what the boundaries of the genre are, because they seem ill-defined, because it's such like a super new genre to exist. So it's hard to tell like what it even is, you know? I know I had that like definition up front. I got that off of Wikipedia. I kind of modified it to make it a little bit more understandable. But, you know, it's not a super well-defined genre. One thing that I would be very interested to see is to see someone try to take this and adapt it into like a show or a movie. Like, I mean, I guess there are examples like Sword Art Online and like a couple others out there, but there's something about, I don't know, those feel like anime, like a Japanese take on it. I would really like to see like a Western take on it into some kind of show, whether that's like live action or animated, but, you know, lean into this genre and see what they could do in a different medium.
I feel like if they did that, it would be almost a Westworld kind of TV show where they're, because that's kind of what Westworld is doing, is this immersive environment that kind of this immersive sandbox that you can do what you want to in and have quests and stuff, where I would love to see something like that with this one. You're right. That would be really cool. Where as much as I like the Ready Player One movie, it didn't quite hit that kind of feeling that these books gave for the immersion within the game.
Yeah, for sure. So that was awesome. Thanks for sponsoring, Ken, and giving us a fun topic to talk about. Take a quick break before we do our weekly geekery and talk about the geeky offer of the week. Why don't you tell people about Patreon, just like Ken used?
Patreon is awesome, you guys. If you didn't hear at the beginning of the episode, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/geek2geekcast. We did just update some of the reward tiers, and one of them is, you're our boss, you tell us what to do, and we do it, just like this episode. We have another where we will record audio for you that you want, no matter what it is within reason. That's one of our tiers. You can also be an executive producer or a sponsor. We have those tiers up there now. Like, you'll get your name in lights, and by lights I mean colored pixels in different places, but it's going to be awesome. And
or just throw us a couple bucks to help support the podcast. That's all we actually ask. Yeah,
that is. I was just telling them about the new stuff.
Okay,
but yeah, the main thing is just your support. It actually keeps us online, literally. So that would be fantastic. We love you guys. And speaking of loving you guys, our real nice thank you this week goes to Nelson, because you've never had that done to you once in your life. You are also the winner of our very first Geek to Geek Media Network email giveaway. So you have a Splatoon amiibo soon to be on its way to you, Nelson. You are fantastic. So thank you so much. Ooh, boy.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone, for supporting the podcast. Around the network this week, Geektitude is still on a hiatus because of Joe's cyborg hand, but it sounds like he's healing up. He's getting better. He doesn't actually... I should clarify, because last week I was playing it deadpan like I tend to do. He doesn't actually have a new hand. He didn't lose his hand. I wouldn't have made fun of it. He just had a hand injury, and there's like a metal plate in there or something now. It's mostly still his hand, but I'm going to keep calling it a cyborg hand just because it amuses me. Tea Time with Katie and Chelsea, they talked about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the movie version of it. And then you can always find Capsule J streaming on Tuesdays from about like 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern, and sometimes on Thursdays and weekends. Troidel is moving his schedule to Thursdays, sometimes after dinner, and then some other times randomly, but mostly he's going to focus in on Thursdays, so there's a consistent day of the week. With that said, let's talk about our weekly geekery, where we talk about what we've been geeking out about this week. You have been making a game, but I want to hear about it.
Okay, how far did you get? I'm curious. Did it ever not crap out on you?
I kept running into bugs. I tried like 4 different times. Yeah, I couldn't get it very far. I mean, I know I tried twice one day and then twice another. Yeah, I got to I kept running into battle bugs where I would get into a battle and couldn't finish it for whatever reason. So I don't know why I was getting a bad luck of the draw, because other people online were playing through, I don't know all of it if there's an end, but a lot of it from what I was hearing.
Yeah, so I've been playing around with RPG Maker, the MV version, the one that runs on JavaScript now. It's really, really good. I've been having a good time with it. DJ Pimp Daddy on Twitter actually spurred me to do this. He's going to be writing a game dev blog as he goes through this and learns how to program in Unity and doing all of this for the Geek to Geek Media site. And so it got me I have this. I bought this on sale a while back, and so I downloaded it and I got all of the assets put together, and I just wanted to learn what it was and how to use it, because I hadn't used it since I was early 2000s, maybe, for RPG Maker 95, 2000, and maybe 2003. It's I used to just play around with it all the time, never did anything good, but I still haven't done anything good, but I wanted to make a dungeon crawl. I was I want to put something together with a beginning and an end that you can go through. And I just use stock assets. I wanted to learn how the eventing worked, on how, you press a button and something happens. You have if-then choices, just how everything worked before diving in and actually having to write JavaScript plugins or anything. And so I made this 5-level dungeon where Like you can go through and there are like Easter eggs hidden all throughout. I know that I named items after some people and things like that for people to find. I have giant spiders in there called Austin Bane because the man is terrified and hates spiders. Like he laughed so hard whenever he saw that, like just things like that. And it's just fun to do, like writing things out. Like it's super absurd. And I just loved doing it. And so I've been working on actually getting better at it. And since I got this and put it up on the web and for people to play, I've been actually playing around, like learning more of the back end and how the actual, I don't even want to say coding, but the how more of the script commands work to be able to move slowly into working into the plugins and actually writing things that affect the game one way or another. Like cool. It's really cool.
No, it sounds like you've been having a good time, and I know other people who have got farther into the game than me have been reacting very positively to it. Just knowing that it's something that you're kind of throwing together and playing with, and not supposed to be a serious commercial release or anything. I think that you did a really good job of setting those expectations every time you shared it. So everybody's reactions have been fun to keep an eye on. So if people do want to check it out, where is a good spot for them to get to it? bit.ly/Beej RPG, bity.com/BEEJ RPG. It is on itch.io, and that one has more problems for some reason because the one that's the bit.ly link, the short link, actually takes you to one on our website where I'm just hosting it ourselves, and the itch won't let you have that many files uploaded to it, and so that's where the issue is coming in that you ran into with the itch version. It's calling, for some reason, it's calling for assets that are not there and that are not set to it. Like that's what I can't figure out. It's like the assets it's calling for, there's no reason for it to be. They're the exact same versions, but I don't know what it was doing. But yeah, so it's bit.ly.com/BEEJ RPG. Like let me know. It's called Beej's Terrible RPG for a reason. There's a super boss in there. If y'all can find the super boss. Yes, it's an interesting freshman effort. I would love to hear more people's take on it. But what else have you been doing this week?
I saw Captain Marvel twice. Love this movie. I like it a lot better the second time. That the first time, Jennifer has been all in on Captain Marvel for a long time. She's really been excited about this movie coming out. She's a Ms. Marvel fan, which got her into being a Captain Marvel fan, and she really loves Carol and Carol Danvers, who's Captain Marvel, if you don't know. And so we went opening night Thursday at 7:00, like first showing, and she was a little disappointed in it just because of her expectations. Like, this is still an origin story movie, and so there were things that were going on in it because it was an origin story movie, and the way that they were telling the story, that she had wrapped her mind around this headcanon of, okay, here's the stuff they're showing in the trailers, so this is the way that the story is going to be set up, and it's going to be awesome. She went in with all sorts of preconceived expectations, and they didn't do it that way, so she had to wrap her mind around those, think about it for a couple of days, and then we took our nephew to see it on Sunday, and it, like, I went in with none of these expectations. I just like Carol Danvers and wanted to see a cool movie, and that's what it was. Like, I really liked it, and I love this character. Brie Larson knocks it out of the park. I've always liked her as an actress, but as Carol Danvers, I cannot wait to see her in Avengers Endgame and everything else that they're going to do in the MCU with her, because it is straight up awesome. Like, she is by far the best part of the movie. Her cat Goose is also magnificent, and it's just like Nick Fury is in it, and it just makes me happy, where it's like a buddy cop movie in a lot of ways of Nick Fury and Captain Marvel. It's very, very good, and I think that even people like me who are superhero burnouts, which is, I don't know if that's what, burned out on superhero movies, have the superhero fatigue, where I enjoyed it so much that I wanted to see it again that weekend. So it's very, very good.
Cool. Yeah, I really want to see it. I haven't gotten around to it yet just because we've been busy, but I hope I get to see it in theaters. I definitely need to see it before Endgame, so I think I kind of have to see it in theaters.
It is not going to be 100% necessary to watch before Endgame.
Well, I know, but I want to.
You are not going to understand why she is as awesome as she is when they get to her in Endgame.
Yeah, it's one of those that like I thought about seeing it on opening night, but I've just been too busy with life. Yeah. But yeah, I'm going to get to it for sure because it looks like an awesome movie.
It's worth taking the kids to. It's one where my 8-year-old
this
nephew...
was a question. Like, the MCU movies, they're all PG-13, but some of them air on like the, higher like 13 side, closer to R, and some of them are very much like I could show it to my 6-year-old, my 8-year-old. Where does this one land?
My 8-year-old nephew, his mom does not let him watch anything inappropriate at all, and she was cool with us being in there. There are maybe 3 or 4 instances of a couple of swear words, but that's it. Like there's not anything other than that in it. Like it was just a couple of swear words, and they're not bad. The worst one starts with an S.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I'm not as worried about the language so much as like the content, but yeah.
Oh no, the content is perfectly fine. My 8-year-old nephew went out of there understanding and, asking questions like any kid does in the theater, but went out of there liking it, and there was nothing questionable like that. Your kids, I think, would absolutely like it.
Okay, cool. That's good to know.
I've also been playing Chrono Cross. I restarted this. Like, I haven't played this since it was new, so it's been almost 20 years, and I don't remember exactly what got me wanting to play it, but I remembered I'd bought it on the Vita and PS3, and so I'm like 10 hours into Chrono Cross right now, and I love this game. The story is really, really interesting, and the combat is way different than I remember it being because you can't grind in this game. Do you remember that?
I remember I went back and I tried to play it, and something about the combat, I just couldn't even deal with it. I don't remember the grind part, but there was something that it was just kind of, I don't know, it felt very dated for the combat.
It does feel dated. I bounced off of it a while back and had maybe 30 or 45 minutes into it. And I went back this time just knowing it. I looked up a little bit about it. And I was like, oh, that's how combat works in this. And because every boss, basically every major battle, you gain a growth star, quote unquote, and that ups your stats. And then like every few battles after that, you gain HP, maybe a couple of strength or something. And then after that, there is no benefit to combat after that, like other than items. So you can actually avoid combat if you want to after that, and you'll still be at roughly the same level that you need to be, just outside of, finding the items you need to buy armor or craft armor and elements and consumables and stuff like that. So it's really neat in that regard. So I'm actually having a good time once I realized what I was getting into, instead of being like, what is this PlayStation 1 stuff? It was very good. I'm enjoying it a lot, and I will definitely be finishing this. So I've also been playing Earthbound. I got into Earthbound, and it's so good. It's so absurd, and my 3DS died, and that's when I picked up Chrono Cross. Like battery died, not died. Like it died, and I had to go charge it, but I was still wanting to play a game, so that's what got me playing Chrono Cross. And then it grabbed me, and I'm like, I'll be back Earthbound, but it's still so good. Like I love that game. Like I remember it from when I was a kid, and it's still just as absurd and just as wonderful as it was then.
Okay, so, cool. Well, yep. I'm glad. It sounds like you've been doing a good variety of stuff this week.
Yeah, a lot.
I haven't been doing a good variety of stuff. I've mostly been playing Anthem because I was trying to get my head around it, not because I was loving the game and couldn't put it down, unfortunately. I'm very mixed on this game, and I'm still kind of playing it because I almost want to just finish the story because I think I'm close to the end, but I'm also not sure if I even want to keep doing that. Let me talk about it. Wow. This is going to come out kind of scattered, and I know that, so bear with me. But before I go into like why I'm so mixed on it, I have to say that the flying movement of like the mech suits, the javelin, those feel amazing. Like that is the best part of the game, is the flying movement. And it feels like if you took that and you made that the core of it, just like how Spider-Man, you know how much like swinging is just fun? Like the javelin flight is just fun. It's just like, I know the word is overused, but it's like visceral. Like it feels like flight and kind of like Iron Man, but just a little bit out of control, you know, where it's not like perfect flight every time when you're in a mech suit. And it's great. Like I love it. Every time I'm flying around, I'm having the best time that I have with this game. Like that's Anthem at its peak. And one of the things is it's like, it's not an open world game. Like I wish it was. If it was an open world game, I think that the flight could shine even more, but it's a loot shooter. And so like you get to fly throughout the missions, but you never just kind of fly to fly, which it feels like if they give you room to do that, it would be a ton of fun. So a little bit mixed there, but I have to say that like that part of the game they just straight up nailed.
Okay, so I'm curious about this. Like the way I understood it was that it was, and I have not played it, and I've barely read up on it. Like I said, I'm not in the mood for Anthem, so I've just kind of waited on it to go on sale, basically. And so I thought it was an open world thing where there were side quests that you could go grab, but there was still a main narrative that went through linearly, kind of like Destiny. So it's not open world?
It's open world in the way that like Destiny is open world. Like you can go on those, whatever they call them, like free play where you just wander and like some stuff randomly happens. But it doesn't feel like an open world game. It feels like you're kind of killing time in this world that really you're meant to be doing missions. Like why are you even in this mode? Should you even be in this mode?
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like you can, but that it doesn't feel like the game is designed for it very well. And it's weird because this isn't really like an RPG experience that, how do I say this? When you think about BioWare, you think about a really good character-driven RPG with like interesting RPG progression and mechanics behind it, right?
Yep.
That
Absolutely.
isn't this game at all. This is a loot shooter in the vein of Destiny. It feels like combat kind of feels like somewhere between Destiny, Mass Effect 3, and Warframe. So if you have those games as a point of reference, find a middle ground. Like that's Anthem. And it's okay. Like it's serviceable, but it's not amazing gameplay. It's fine. Like it's fine. Like there's nothing I can point to and be like, that's horrible about the combat, because there's not. But it's also not amazing, you know.
But it's still action game combat, right? It's not any kind of RPG type Knights of the Old Republic BioWare combat.
No, it's action. It's action for sure. Okay. And it's a shooter. It's a third-person shooter.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure when you said that. I was like, that's what I was thinking it was.
Yeah, and so there's all of these things that it's just like, you know, you start getting nitpicky, and then I just have a whole list of things here that are just like nitpicky. Like if it was any one of these things and, you know, the other ones didn't add up, it would probably be fine. But it's like there are loading screens everywhere, and the loading screens are just one of the worst parts of the game. Like I forgot how much loading screens break your immersion, because we're so used to, even if you have a loading screen, it's one loading screen right at the beginning of the game, and then you never really have to deal with it again, right?
And if you do, they're fairly short, where you see a couple of rotating things down in the corner, like Persona telling you to take your time, and then you go on. It's
these are
quick.
like 2 minutes for each loading screen. And they happen every time you go into a mission, and every time you switch areas within a mission, and every time you finish a mission. And any time that you want to look at your inventory, you have to sit through like a minute and a half of loading screen.
What?
And anytime you want to go to the single player fort to actually interact with the story, you have to sit through another 2 minutes of loading screen. Like, there is no seamlessness to this game at all. It is just like very cut up into pieces, and it's so annoying. It's like, it is the worst part of the game for me, are the loading screens.
Do you think this is because you're playing it on PS4 rather than PC?
No, because I know people who are playing it on PC that are also having tons of loading screens. They're not as bad. They're not like 2 minutes. It's like a minute, maybe a minute and a half, but it's still really, really long.
Yeah, that's unacceptable. The longest load screens I've seen on a game have been the Lego Incredibles on Switch, where they were obnoxiously long, like 3 or 4 minutes each between worlds. Like it didn't happen during the world or anything like that, so once you did it, it was fine. But we were just like, why does a game nowadays have this kind of loading screen? And if you had that many of them on Anthem, yeah, that would totally ruin everything.
Yeah, it doesn't feel modern at all. And it's really frustrating when you just want to play and get into it. I mean, I've had missions where there were more time sitting in loading screens than actually playing the gameplay of the mission, because they were like short little missions. So that's frustrating. But then also every time you want to do your equipment, right, which is a core thing to a loot shooter or to any kind of like loot-based game, Diablo, whatever, you need quick access to your inventory so you can go in there and look at stuff and swap it out and think about how am I going to do my build. Anytime you want to do that, you have to sit through an almost 2-minute loading screen.
That is insane.
It just feels like
Why?
a huge miss. I don't know why. But, outside of that, that's my core complaint. A bunch of other little stuff, like it's always online, which, I mean, that's the nature of the game, but it's one of those things where, like, I really love, suspend, resume, because I use that all the time because I have kids and I have to walk away from stuff. But it is a PvE multiplayer game, which is nice. It's not PvP. Like, they didn't waste time on that. Like, I'm not a big PvP fan when it comes to these type of games, so I always feel like anything they do for that towards, like, a Destiny is just time lost they could have put into PvE, which is, I guess, a benefit that we get here. If the game was better, there's just no evidence of that. There are sorry to take a dig at him. Yeah,
it's just the way that you say that. There was such just disdain for that, just how much lost potential there was on this.
Yeah, and it's still buggy. Like, it's been out for almost a month because, I was busy moving. So I got to this game a little bit later than I normally would. And I can't believe how buggy it still is. Like, I've had plenty of times where, maybe not plenty of times, but I've had a handful of times where I lost progress due to getting kicked out of a mission because of loading screens or because of something going on with the server side. And it's like, you don't get any of your items, you don't get any of the experience from the mission. It's just like, well, play that again. You don't get anything. And I've had times where, like, sound effects don't happen or just don't load in or there's no sound at all. And there was a time where I randomly had my weapons disappear from my inventory. And I think I took a screenshot and put it on Twitter of one time when I was like in an area and I just encountered it was like a test asset or it was like a placeholder asset. It was just this big pink polygon. And I was like, really? Like, really? This is a final game that, like, I paid $60 for? Okay, sure. And
that has a big tower that says, actually said on top of it, placeholder asset.
Yes, that was it. It was great.
It was
just
one of
couldn't
my
believe it.
favorite things I've ever seen in terms of screenshots. Like, I loved the fact that it happened to you and that I got to see it. But you're absolutely right. My thought was, I can't believe that they pushed this live unless that was just something that, if that happened while it was loading, sometimes you get like missing assets or something. But this one was specifically labeled as a placeholder asset.
Yeah. This game just feels like in a lot of ways it was pushed out the door too early. As much as they said, like, oh, there was no development delay. We delayed it for other reasons. It's like, no, you delayed this one for development time and it wasn't enough. Like, you should have let it bake for longer. But who knows how much of that is the publisher, EA, just kind of pushing it out the door early. The other really disappointing thing is, like, character and BioWare storytelling. Like, Mass Effect 2 is probably one of my favorite story-based, character-based, like, games that I've played because you get to meet the crew, you get to learn about them, and then you, like, grow with them over time, and you learn more about them and get into their personal stories, which lead to personal missions. And there's just, like, none of that in this game. There's nothing that's hooking me into the story, even though I'm paying attention. I'm trying to get hooked because it's BioWare storytelling, and I want to. Like, I am so prepped to get into this game, and it's not doing it for me. The story and the narrative feels so disconnected from the gameplay that it's super disappointing. And it's, like I said, it's partitioned off into its own section, the fort that you have to spend 2 minutes loading into, and then you're walking around to get to areas that are, like, you have to walk really far sometimes to even get to the characters that you want to talk to. And then you get there, and then it's like, oh, they don't have any dialogue options. Glad that I just walked for 2 minutes to find this guy. And it kind of wants
of course you can't fly there.
No, because you're inside in a first-person view, which I don't know why it switches you to that. That was another. It's just goes further to differentiate the fact that, like, gameplay is like a third-person loot shooter, and the story they're trying to tell through one-on-one dialogue with NPCs in this narrowly confined fort in first person. Like, there's some kind of weird disconnect there, and I'm just waiting for the characters to get interesting and, like, the dialogue choices, right? Like Mass Effect and other BioWare games, your choices matter. And this game, it feels like there's only ever two choices because of the way they have the dialogue structured. And it never really seems to matter which one you choose. Like, you can say one thing or another, and maybe they'll react to it for, like, one line of dialogue, and then they go right back onto whatever they would have said, regardless of which one you picked, you know?
Yeah, and that probably has to do with it being such a massive game in terms of online players and how they're having to branch out the story. But that kind of is a concession that you shouldn't have to make for BioWare. That's not something that was a big problem in in the Old Republic as well, that none of your choices really mattered to anything. It was just a force or side, dark or light side ranking. It wasn't an actual change in the story itself. So it's like, yeah, this one, it's like BioWare hasn't been able to be BioWare in a while.
Yeah, it's sad. So, I mean, I started liking the game a little bit more when I gave up on paying attention to the story and started treating it as a podcast game where I just like don't even listen to any of the sound effects or the dialogue or the story, which is sad. It's a BioWare game. Like, I shouldn't do that. You know, it took me probably like 15 hours to get to that point because I kept giving it more chances and it just didn't do it for me. So I put in a podcast. I started playing it for just like the gameplay instead, and I liked it a little bit more. But even with that said, I was really only playing like 1 or 2 missions at a time, which is weird. Like if I really get hooked on a game, I'll just carve out like, even though my schedule's so busy, you know that every once in a while I'll manage to squeeze like 40 hours of a new game in the first week. And I think in total I've played like 20 hours of this game over the last 3 or 4 weeks, however long it's been out, because I'm only playing it in like 30-minute chunks, maybe an hour if it's like a long session, because it's so broken up that it gives me so many chances to be like, oh, I could be doing something else, or maybe I should go to bed, or I'll play with my phone for a while, and then, oh, it loaded, like I should pay attention. Like it's just not holding my attention, basically. And I think it's trying to split the difference between, you know, BioWare storytelling game and games as a service shooter, and it's just failing at that. And it's taking me so much work to find the fun in the game that I'm disappointed. Like I'm ready to admit that I'm disappointed and that it's a lot of work for me to find the fun, because I really just wanted it to be flawless and seamless and just like suck me in, and it didn't even though I wanted it to.
You went in with kind of mixed expectations on it, like you hoped it would be good but didn't necessarily think it would be great, based on our other conversations we had long before it actually came out. So I'm sad that actually came true, that the EA part of it, and that they kept BioWare on such a leash, it seems like, that it didn't turn into the game that it could have been.
Yeah, so let me end on a couple other things that I do like about it. So like I said, the flying is amazing, and hitting the button to like take off and fly just feels so good. Every time you hit that button, it's like, yes, let's do this. Like every single time, they nailed that. And the Storm Javelin is the one that I landed on, and it feels so good to do the ultimate attack with the Storm Javelin, where you're just like calling in elemental attacks from above. When you're the Storm Javelin, you're basically an elemental mage in mech form, which just feels
awesome.
Badass. It's so cool. And there's also hovering in the game. So like if you're in midair, you can hit a button and your character will like hover, and you can kind of move them around as if you were not actually walking, but you know, you can stay vertically in the position you're in, but you can move around horizontally on the horizontal plane.
Yeah.
So you can basically use it as like a shooting platform from wherever you want to be in midair. And the Storm Javelin can hover for the longest out of all of them. So I spend basically most of the game in the air, and hovering as a Storm Javelin just feels really good too. What they've done with it, like you get extra shield and you get some extra effects around you. And I don't know, they kind of nailed it with that character basically. So those things are good, and I really like the Storm Javelin, and I really like that elemental mage type of feeling gameplay, but it's just surrounded by gameplay that isn't super varied. Like, it's not bad, it's just not great. It's very mediocre and good enough, and a good enough of a BioWare game doesn't feel right, you know?
Yeah, I totally get it. That's one of the reasons that the Old Republic is so hard for a lot of people to get into, and for me to stick with, is because that it's just all right. And sometimes it's really what you want, and then it's like, I'll come back later. That's kind of the way this sounds like.
Now that I've talked about it on the podcast, it's like I'm either going to sit down and blast through the end of the story to say that I finished it, or I'm going to sit down, boot it up, realize that I'm done with the game because I've already kind of got my thoughts out there, and never boot it up again. Like, those are really the only two paths forward that I see with this game. I don't see it lasting much longer.
How long is the story itself supposed to last to be able to get to where the story itself stops and gets ready for an expansion or a content release?
I don't think very long. I think it's like 10 to 15 hours, somewhere in there. And they throw this... Oh, I didn't even talk about this. Okay, let me... This is another one of those things that it's like, why did they do this? And maybe it's just to extend the main story, but as soon as the main story actually feels like it's picking up for the first time in the entire game, they put up this huge roadblock in your way where you have to go and visit these 4 tombs of these like I don't even know, right? At that point, the story was like gobbledygook. It's like they're someone who had javelins, or they're famous, or they're, historical or something. But there's tombs of people that used to be freelancers like you. And you go to visit one, and then it's like, you're not good enough. You have to complete these challenges. And it just gives you a list of grindy challenges that you would expect to be hidden in an achievement menu somewhere. And it does that for 4 of these all at the same time. And so you go and you're like, okay, I have to open 15 treasure chests. I've seen like 5 in my entire gameplay right now. I guess I got to figure out how to do that. Or like, like I hadn't done a melee kill the entire game because I'm a storm. Like I float above guys, and that's what I do. I rain down elemental damage on them. That's what I'm having fun doing. And it's like, get 50 melee kills.
Oh my goodness.
So it's stuff like that you have to just go and grind out because you probably haven't done most of it yet. And as soon as you start working on those, the game feels like a grind, and like, okay, well, I wanted to see what was next in the story because you finally had me slightly hooked, and now you completely lost me again. But then when you do finish them, you go to the tomb and you're like, okay, I did the work. Like, I really want to see something cool here. Give me a cutscene, give me some like lore thing or something really interesting, or an awesome weapon, or like armor, right? These are like javelins that are historical and important. Give me like their armor sets. Or you walk in and there's one like tomb just at the end of a hallway that you interact with, and it's like, good job, you did it, have a green item, and that's it. Like that's it, right? And then you just leave, and I couldn't believe it. Like I couldn't believe that was what was at the end of this huge roadblock they put up in my way. I saw that and I just gave up for the night. I was like, okay, I'm coming back later.
I was about to say, it sounds like that's the point where I would imagine that you would just stop. Like, I could see you quitting the game right there, too. It's like, nope, I am done with this. But even just sitting it down for the night would just be like, I'm glad that I wasn't wrong in that feeling, because I'm sitting here, I was listening, I was like, I wonder if he just quit. That sounds like he just quit and get mad.
I didn't rage quit. I just, like, I don't even know, like sullenly quit. Like, I can't believe this. Like, I'm done with this for tonight. So anyway, there's my Anthem thoughts. I really wanted to be positive. I've been looking forward to this game for like a year or 2 at this point, and it's just not what I wanted it to be. So a couple other games that I did try. I tried the Division 2 beta. It was all right. Like the gameplay was, it felt more interesting than Anthem, unfortunately, but the setting just doesn't do it for me. Like, if that wasn't a real world post-apocalyptic, like trying to be realistic setting, I might be able to actually get into the Division, but something about the setting, I'm kind of bounce off of it. But hey, if you like the Division 1, the Division 2 seems like it's better, so I would go get it for sure. And then I've been playing an idle game called Egg Inc., because every once in a while I just need an idle game in my life. You guys probably know this by now. I really like idle games that tell a story that's like a subtle story, right? Or it doesn't even have to be a subtle story, but I like idle games that tell some kind of story, and it's not just grind, because then I'll bounce off it super fast. And Egg Inc. is kind of telling me one, but I'm also kind of getting to the point where I have diminishing returns. I've unlocked about half of the eggs. This probably makes no sense to you.
I'm looking it up because I wanted to know what you were talking about. So I'm looking at pictures on the Wikipedia page of it.
Yeah, you start with like one kind of egg, and then once your farm reaches a certain value, you can unlock the next type of egg, and that's kind of where the story's coming from. Like, you start with just a normal egg that you would think of that exists in real life, and then you unlock like a healing egg. Like, oh, the eggs kind of have healing properties. This is interesting. Like, the world starts investigating eggs more, and chickens and stuff like that. And you work your way up to like fusion eggs and like immortality eggs and like things that, allow transportation and teleportation and space travel, and you never see any of that. It's just like kind of going on in the background and through some of the newspapers that show up on your doorstep. But there's enough of a story there that I was like, okay, I want to see what the next thing is. Like, they're having fun with this, right? So I think I'm through about half of the eggs. I think I'm also about ready to give up, but I'll probably give it another day or 2 just to see if I prestige enough, if I can like get over the hump that I'm at. But I kind of doubt it, because these games usually turn into a grind fest at some point, and I think I finally hit that point. So I might look for another idle game. I'm just kind of in the mood for that type of thing.
I'm looking at the only screenshot that they have on Wikipedia of this is just a big red button with a chicken on it, and the first sentence is the gameplay consists of a red button that can switch sizes and has a chicken on it. It's like,
that's
all right,
true. That is a true statement. Yep.
That is the perfect description of a game.
Yeah, sometimes you just need to see the numbers go up and it makes you happy. And I think that's true of every person who's ever played a video game. And idle games, just distill it down to its core. And maybe I'm playing this because Anthem wasn't giving me what I wanted and I just needed to see the numbers go up somewhere. So Egg Inc. and Anthem, they go hand in hand, I guess.
That is so sad on so many levels.
I think that's it for this week.
All right.
Yeah, let's just end on a meh kind of note.
All right.
Yeah, you can write to us with comments, suggestions, or feedback. Our email address is geek2geekcast@gmail.com, or reach us on Twitter @geek2geekcast. We also have longer discussion threads on the subreddit at reddit.com/r/geek2geekcast.
We also have great discussions on Slack and Discord. You can go to geek2geekmedia.com for invite links so that you can hang out with all of us and check out all the other shows on the network.
I blog at agreenmushroom.com, and you can find me at grnmushroom. That's green mushroom without the E's on Twitter.
I'm on Twitter as @Professor Beej. That's Beej with 2 E's, and I blog at the Geek to Geek Media site.
We've been Void and Beej with your Geek to Geek podcast. That'll do it for this week. See you next week, geeks.
Bye, geeks. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Ken.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie.
And I'm Chelsea, and we are the hosts of Tea Time with Katie and Chelsea. We are two best friends who love pop culture and talking about pretty much whatever we want. Katie!
Yes.
Stop thinking about Zac Efron and tell our future listeners what some of our latest episodes have been about.
Well, we've talked about Zac Efron.
No, get it together, Katie.
Fine. We've talked about fan fiction, classical literature adaptations, favorite TV couples, and so much more. So grab your cup of tea or whatever your drink of choice is and download our podcast today.
Hi, my name is Joe Hogan, and I'm a geek. And if you're currently listening to this, there's a good chance you're a geek too. So check out my podcast, Geektitude. Each week, I talk with somebody about their geek aptitude. Sometimes I talk to people in a geeky profession. Sometimes it's someone doing something really cool with their geekiness. Often it's another geeky podcaster. But it's always someone who wants to share their inner geek. So join me each week as we come together to geek out about all the geeky stuff we love. And remember, this week, keep it geek.
Hello friends, this is Troidal Power inviting you to join me over on Twitch most weeknights, sometime after dinner. Video games have always been a social hobby for me, with friends and family crammed together on a couch, chatting away while someone holds the controller. And thanks to the power of the internet, I've got my own virtual couch over on Twitch, where you can kick back and goof off while I play games. Find me on Twitch by searching Troidal Power, that's TROYTLE Power, to snag a spot on the couch.